Welcome to the Law Offices of Chris M. Ingram podcast. We're delighted you joined us. Today we are discussing how to acquire U.S. citizenship. Okay, let's talk U.S. immigration. For a lot of folks who've, built their lives here, becoming a U.S. citizen is really the final stage, the culmination of that whole immigration journey. So if you're a green card holder thinking about this big step, or maybe you're just curious about how it all works, well, you're in the right place.
Absolutely. And naturalization, it's a huge moment. And yeah, the rules, the timelines, it can all seem a bit complicated sometimes. But our goal here in this deep dive is really to shine a light on the most important parts of eligibility for you. We want to make it clear, give some real insight into what actually matters.
Right. So we're going to start with the basics, the foundation, really having that green card. Then we'll get into the timelines, how long you typically need to be a permanent resident before you can apply. And that can change depending on how you got the green card in the first place. We'll also talk about showing good moral character, what that actually involves, and the citizenship test itself.
And the exceptions, too. There are always exceptions in immigration law.
Always. Okay, let's dive in. So the green card. That's the starting block.
Exactly. That's the baseline. Unless you're looking at some very, very specific situations, like, say, a U.S. citizen adopting a young child abroad, you need that green card. Legal permanent resident status, LPR status, that's the foundation for applying for U.S. citizenship. It's basically your proof of permanent settlement here.
And just briefly, for anyone listening who might be a bit earlier on this path, what are the usual ways people get that green card?
Well, the most common routes we see are through marriage to a U.S. citizen or being sponsored by a U.S. employer for a specific job. But of course, there are other ways too, family sponsorship through parents or siblings, some employment categories where people can even petition for themselves. But marriage and employment, those are probably the big ones that lead to permanent residency and then, down the line, potentially citizenship. The key is that legal status has to be established first, almost always.
Okay, so you got the green card. Check. Now the question everyone asks, how long? How long do I have to wait as a permanent resident before I can actually apply to become a citizen? This is where the timelines come in, right?
Exactly. And the wait times generally depend on how you got your permanent residency. So if your green card came through marriage to a U.S. citizen, the standard rule is you can apply for naturalization after being a lawful permanent resident for 3 years.
3 years. If marriage to a citizen was the reason, okay, that's noticeably shorter than other ways.
It is.
So what about those other paths, like getting it through other family members, parents, siblings, or maybe through your job?
Right. For people who became permanent residents through, say, family sponsorship, other than that spouse route, or through their employer, or maybe even self-petitioning in certain job categories, for them, the standard waiting period before applying for citizenship is 5 years. 5 years from the date the green card was officially issued.
5 years, okay.
But, and this is really important, hitting that 3-year or 5-year mark, that's just one requirement. You still have to meet all the other eligibility criteria. It's not automatic.
That's a really crucial point. It's not just ticking off calendar days. Now, something else our sources mentioned, which sounds pretty important, is how this residency period can be affected if you spend, a lot of time outside the U.S.
Yes. Continuous residence.
How do those trips abroad play into this?
They definitely can. This is where it gets a bit more detailed. U.S. immigration law looks closely at whether you've actually maintained continuous residence here during that required 3 or 5 years. Taking long trips outside the country can potentially break that continuity and, reset the clock or delay your eligibility. Our sources point to basically 3 different time bands for absences, and each has different rules.
Okay, 3 time bands. What are they? What do green card holders need to watch out for?
So the first one is any single trip out of the U.S. that lasts up to 6 months. Generally, a trip that short doesn't automatically break your continuous residence. However, if you have a pattern, lots of trips pushing that 6-month limit, it could raise questions about whether the U.S. is really your main home.
I see. Frequent shorter trips could still be an issue. What's the next level?
The second category is a single absence that's longer than 6 months, but less than 1 year, less than 12 months. An absence like that creates what's called a legal presumption that you have broken your continuous residence.
A presumption, so you can argue against it.
Yes, you can try to overcome it. You'd need to provide strong evidence showing you didn't intend to abandon your U.S. residence, that you maintain ties and always plan to return. Things like keeping your home, job, family ties here, filing U.S. taxes.
Okay, makes sense. And the third category, I'm guessing that's the most serious one.
That's right. If you're outside the U.S. for one continuous period of 12 months or more, that's generally seen as a definite break in your continuous residence. In most situations, that means when you come back, you'd likely have to start that 3 or 5 year residency clock all over again from your return date.
Wow, okay, so that's a major impact.
It really is. And because the rules around these absences, how they calculate the time, what evidence works, it can get quite complex depending on your specific situation. We're actually going to dedicate our entire next deep dive to this topic. So if you travel a lot or you've had some longer stays abroad, definitely tune in for that one.
Good to know. Sounds like a must listen for many. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Beyond just being physically present for the right amount of time, there's this other requirement, demonstrating good moral character. What does that actually mean when immigration is looking at your application?
Yeah, good moral character. It's a really key concept. It basically boils down to showing that during your time as a permanent resident, you've lived up to the standards, the sort of community standards, expected of someone wanting to become a citizen. You're asking to join the society formally, so you need to show you've conducted yourself appropriately.
And how do they measure that? What are they looking for?
Well, as our sources make clear, a huge part of it is your criminal record, or rather, the lack of a serious one. They specifically mention crimes of moral turpitude. Now, that's a legal term, but you can think of it as acts that are seen as inherently base, vile, or depraved, contrary to accepted moral standards. Things involving dishonesty, fraud, theft, serious violence.
So definitely more serious than like a speeding ticket.
Oh, generally, yes. Much more serious. We're talking about felonies, significant misdemeanors, things that really show a disregard for the law or basic ethical principles. And the advice from the sources is really clear here. If you have any kind of criminal history, especially something serious, it's highly recommended you wait. Wait until you've got a good long period. They suggest at least 5 years of a completely clean record after whatever happened before you even think about applying for citizenship.
5 years clean.
At least. And even then, talking to an attorney who really understands both criminal law and immigration law is crucial. Absolutely essential to figure out if that past issue could block your application.
That sounds like very solid advice. Don't risk it without checking first. Are there other things besides avoiding crime that fall under good moral character?
Yes, definitely. Another big one highlighted is tax compliance. You need to show that you filed all your required federal, state, and local tax returns for the years you were obligated to file as a resident, and critically, that you've paid the taxes you owed. Or, if you owe back taxes, that you have an official payment plan set up with the IRS or the state and you're following it.
So paying your taxes is part of being a good resident, essentially.
Exactly. It's viewed as a fundamental responsibility. Not being compliant with your taxes can absolutely raise red flags and potentially lead to a denial of your citizenship application.
Okay, so main things are stay out of serious legal trouble, establish a long, clean record if you had past issues, and make sure your taxes are in order. Sounds like the core of it. Now, our sources also included a payroll story, someone named Pete, who went through this whole process. What can we learn from his experience?
Yeah, Pete's story is interesting because it gives a real human perspective, especially for someone who waited a long time. He came to the U.S. at 21, got his green card, but didn't apply for citizenship until, 35 years later.
35 years.
Yeah. And one thing that apparently really surprised him during the process was finding out that USCIS, the immigration agency, still had his original green card application file from all those decades ago.
Really? From 35 years back?
Yep. It just shows how long these records are kept, and maybe a little reminder for everyone to try and keep copies of their own important immigration papers, too.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
So why did he wait so long and then decide to apply after 35 years?
Well, he mentioned that hitting retirement made him realize the U.S. was definitely his permanent home. Mm-hmm. He wanted to participate more fully, be able to vote. He also joked about having a visceral loathing of all things bureaucratic, which might have contributed to the delay. I think a few people might relate to that feeling. Right. I can definitely understand that sentiment. What was his actual interview like? Was it intimidating? He actually described it as surprisingly pleasant. Turns out the USCIS officer interviewing him had also worked for the same big phone company, Verizon, where Pete spent his career. So they ended up chatting a bit about that. It's a nice reminder that these are official interviews, yes, but they're conducted by real people, and sometimes you find those connections.
That's nice to hear. Did you get any other insights from the officer?
He did. He asked her what she saw as the biggest hurdle for applicants, and her answer was pretty blunt, not having enough English skills. She apparently said it was tough to approve someone when they couldn't even understand the oath of allegiance they need to take at the end.
Ah, okay. That leads us right into the U.S. citizenship test itself. That's another major part of the process, isn't it? Tell us about that test.
It is. The citizenship test is designed to check two main things: your basic ability to understand and use English, and your knowledge of U.S. civics government and history. So there's an English test component, which looks at your reading, writing, and speaking skills at a basic level. And then there's the civics test. For this part, the officer will ask you up to 10 questions from a list of 100 possible questions.
10 questions out of 100. Okay.
Right. And these questions cover things like American history, the principles of American democracy, the structure of government, rights and responsibilities of citizens. To pass, you need to answer at least 6 out of the 10 questions correctly.
6 out of 10. So it's not just about English fluency, but also knowing some fundamentals about the country.
Exactly. The idea is to ensure prospective citizens have a basic grasp of the country they want to formally join. USCIS provides all the study materials online, the list of 100 questions with answers, vocabulary lists for the English part, so you can definitely prepare. Pete's story just kind of underscores why that English part is practically important too.
Right. But what about people who, maybe because of their age or other reasons, really struggle with English? Our sources mentioned some accommodations might be available.
Yes, that's a really important point. The system does recognize that not everyone will be fluent in English, especially those who've lived here a long time, but maybe stayed within communities speaking their native language. So there are specific exemptions from the English language requirement, primarily based on age and how long you've been a permanent resident.
Okay, what are those exemptions?
If you are 50 years old or older, and you have lived in the U.S. as a lawful permanent resident for at least 20 years, they call it the 50-20 rule, sometimes you don't have to take the English test. Similarly, if you're 55 years old or older and you've been a permanent resident for at least 15 years, the 55-15 rule, you are also exempt from the English test.
Okay, 15, 20 years or 55 and 15 years, that probably helps quite a few long-term residents. So no English test for them.
No English test required, but, and this is key, they still have to take the civics test.
Oh, okay. Still got to know the history and government stuff.
Right. But for those who qualify for the English exemption based on age and residency, they are allowed to take that civics test in their native language. They just need to bring a qualified interpreter with them to the interview.
Got it. Take the civics test in their own language with an interpreter.
Exactly. And there's one more layer for older applicants. If you are 65 years old or older and you've been a permanent resident for at least 20 years, you not only get to take the civics test in your language with an interpreter, but you also get a simplified version. They only have to study from a smaller list of 20 questions instead of the full 100.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
A smaller list of questions for the 65 and over crowd with 20 years residency. That seems helpful.
It is. It makes it a bit less daunting.
Are there any other situations where someone might get an accommodation? Maybe for reasons other than age?
Yes. There's also a medical disability exception. If someone has a physical, developmental, or mental impairment that prevents them from being able to learn or demonstrate knowledge of English and/or civics, they might be able to get a waiver for those requirements. This involves having a licensed doctor or clinical psychologist fill out a specific form, the N648 Medical Certification for Disability Exceptions. That form details the condition and explains exactly why it prevents the applicant from meeting the test requirements.
Okay, so medical exemptions are possible too, with proper documentation.
Correct. So the system does try to be accommodating, but it's probably still fair to say, as Pete's experience hinted, that having at least some basic English skills usually makes the whole process, and just life in the U.S. generally, a bit smoother.
That makes sense.
Right.
Well, this has been a really thorough walkthrough of the main things involved in becoming a U.S. citizen if you already have a green card. We covered the green card being essential, the different waiting times, 3 years or 5 years, usually the importance of good moral character, especially regarding crime and taxes.
And the citizenship test, both the English and civics parts, plus those important exceptions and accommodations for certain applicants.
Yeah, feels like we covered the core eligibility pieces.
I think so. Hopefully it gives folks a much clearer picture of what's involved when they start thinking about naturalization.
We hope you got a lot out of this discussion. In the next presentation in this series, we'll discuss the implications of prolonged absences from the U.S. Leave us a comment if you can. Also visit our website at www.breakthroughusa.com. See you next time on Let's Talk U.S. Immigration.